The grand hall of the Élysée Palace hummed with the low murmur of interpreters and the clink of crystal glasses, but the air felt thick, laced with the faint scent of polished oak and overbrewed coffee. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden haze over the long mahogany table, where leaders from across the Atlantic gathered under the guise of unity. Outside, Paris's autumn rain pattered against the windows like impatient fingers, mirroring the tension building within. Donald Trump leaned back in his chair, his broad frame dwarfing the ornate seat, fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the armrest. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on Emmanuel Macron across the table. The French president sat ramrod straight, his suit impeccable, a single gold pen twirling between his fingers, a habit that betrayed the storm beneath his composed facade. Flanking them were advisors. On Trump's side, a cluster of stern-faced aides clutching briefing folders stamped with the eagle emblem. On Macron's, elegant officials whispering into earpieces, their faces pale under the weight of the agenda. The summit was meant to bridge divides: NATO funding, trade tariffs, the creeping shadow of Chinese influence in Europe. But the room's oxygen seemed to thin as Macron cleared his throat, his voice slicing through the polite hum. Mr. President, the European Union stands at a crossroads. Our defense expenditures have risen to 2% of GDP, as pledged, yet your administration's tariffs on steel and aluminum, 25% on our exports, undermine that commitment. We've lost €4 billion in the last fiscal year alone. This isn't partnership, it's predation. Trump's lips curled into a half-smile, but his eyes didn't soften. He leaned forward, the chair creaking under his weight, and exhaled a short, dismissive breath. Emmanuel, you talk alliance, but let's look at the numbers. The US foots 70% of NATO's bill, $700 billion annually, while France drags its feet on joint ops. Your Mirage jets? Outdated relics. We've got F-35s that could buy your entire wine industry twice over. Tariffs? They're fair play. You want subsidies? Earn them. A hush fell, broken only by the rustle of papers as Macron's foreign minister slid a dossier across the table. Glossy charts detailed French investments, €300 million poured into joint cyber defense with American firms, offset by US pullbacks from European bases. Macron's pen stopped twirling, he tapped it once, sharply, against the wood. Earn them? We've committed 20,000 troops to the eastern flank, more than Germany and Italy combined. But your withdrawal from the Paris Accord cost us global credibility, and now this? A proposed 30% hike on auto imports would shutter 10 factories in Lyon and Stuttgart. It's not just economics, it's the soul of our transatlantic bond. Trump's advisor, a wiry man with a perpetual scowl, interjected, sliding his own folder forward. Soul? Try survival. China's eating your lunch, 50% of your solar panels from Beijing, while we slap tariffs to protect our steelworkers. 800,000 jobs at risk if we don't push back. France gets a pass because of history? No. Allies pay up or play alone. The room's tension coiled tighter, glances darting like sparks. Macron's jaw tightened, a vein pulsing at his temple. He leaned in, voice dropping to a measured steel. You say protectionism, I say isolation. If the US pivots to bilateral deals, bypassing the EU, we lose cohesion. Imagine, Russia probing our borders, Iran funding proxies, all while your walls rise. We've got intel, shared, by the way, showing a 15% uptick in hybrid threats since your election rhetoric. Trump chuckled, low and rumbling, but it carried no warmth. He pushed back from the table, the scrape echoing like a challenge. Intel? We've got satellites counting every Kalashnikov in Donbass. But here's the truth, Europe's freeloading ends today. I propose a reset. US covers 60% of NATO if you drop the tariffs and commit to a joint carrier group in the Indo-Pacific. Refuse? We redirect funds. $500 billion reallocated to Pacific allies. Your move, Emmanuel. Macron's eyes narrowed, the pen snapping shut in his fist. Advisors on both sides shifted, folders whispering open and shut. The rain outside intensified, drumming a frantic beat. In the heavy silence that followed, Macron rose slowly, his chair gliding back without a sound. A reset? Or a rupture? The EU won't be dictated to in our house. Trump met his gaze, unflinching, as the first murmurs of protest rippled from the sidelines. But beneath the bluster, a flicker, something unspoken, a shadow of deals cut in dimmer rooms. The summit teetered, alliances fraying like old rope. As the session broke for a recess, Macron pulled his chief of staff aside in the shadowed antechamber, the air cooler here, scented with aged leather and faint cigar smoke. Get me the back-channel logs, he murmured, voice taut. What did his people promise the Germans last night? The aide nodded, slipping away, but not before Trump, lingering by the door, caught the exchange. His phone buzzed in his pocket, an encrypted text from an unknown number, Macron's bluffing. Leak the subsidy figures. Now. In the corridor's dim light, Macron's phone vibrated with a similar alert, a whistleblower's tip, anonymous and urgent. The game had already begun, and the Real clash waited in the wings. The rain had eased to a drizzle by the time the delegates reconvened in the Élysées' secure briefing room, a chamber buried one level below the grand halls, its walls lined with soundproofed panels and screens flickering with encrypted feeds. The air here carried a sterile chill, undercut by the sharp tang of printer ink from freshly run documents. Dim LED lights cast long shadows across the oval table, where Emmanuel Macron sat flanked by his foreign minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian, and a cadre of EU attaches, their faces etched with the strain of the morning's barbs. Across from them, Donald Trump sprawled in his seat, tie loosened just a fraction, his national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, at his elbow with a tablet glowing under his fingers. The recess had stretched longer than planned, 40 minutes of frantic calls and whispered consultations, but the undercurrent of suspicion lingered like smoke. Macron's chief of staff had returned with a slim folder, its edges crisp, containing intercepted chatter from the previous night's bilateral talks, promises of trade concessions to Germany in exchange for Berlin's silence on NATO shortfalls. Macron opened the session with a measured nod, but his voice held an edge honed sharper than before. He slid the folder toward the center of the table, its cover stamped with the EU's starry circle. Gentlemen, let's dispense with pleasantries. Last night, your team offered Chancellor Merkel a carve-out on digital services taxes, 10% relief on €200 billion in annual transatlantic data flows, if she backs your Indo-Pacific pivot. That's not alliance building, that's divide and conquer. We've seen the cables, $3.2 billion in projected German gains, at France's expense. Trump's eyes flicked to the folder, unblinking, as O'Brien leaned in to murmur something, his pen clicking once against the tablet's edge. The room held its breath, the hum of ventilation the only sound. Trump exhaled slowly, a puff that stirred the papers. Emmanuel, you wiretap allies now? Cute. But facts are facts. Germany's in for $120 billion in US LNG exports this year, up 30% from last. France? Your nuclear plants leak subsidies like a sieve, €8 billion propping up EDF, while you lecture on fair trade. If Merkel's smart, she'll take the deal. Europe's a big tent, not everyone's hiding behind Brussels skirts. Le Drian interjected, his voice gravelly from years of diplomatic trenches, pushing a secondary dossier forward, charts mapping NATO base relocations. Hiding? We've relocated 5,000 French troops to the Baltic states since the Crimea annexation, costing $1.8 billion in logistics alone. Your pullback from Ramstein? That's 700 US personnel yanked, leaving a gap Russia exploits with 20% more incursions. And those subsidies? Your farm bill funnels $40 billion to American agribusiness, undercutting our markets by 15%. This isn't revelation, it's retaliation. The tension snapped like a taut wire. Trump's fist came down lightly on the table, not a bang, but enough to rattle the water glasses, droplets scattering. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a gravelly timbre that filled the room. Retaliation? You want documents? Here's mine. O'Brien activated the screen, projecting a cascade of figures, U.S. defense outlays at $762 billion for the fiscal year, contrasted against Europe's collective $190 billion, 68% shortfall. Side-by-side maps showed French arms deals with Saudi Arabia, €12 billion in Rafale jets, while U.S. firms lost out on similar bids in the Gulf. Macron's face hardened, the gold pen resuming its twirl, faster now. You show arms sales, I show alliances crumbling. That Saudi deal? Offset by our joint ops in the Sahel, $400 million shared with your special forces. But pivot to the real cost, your tariff wall has idled 23,000 workers in the EU auto sector since January. Peugeot alone reports a 9% drop in exports to the States. If this leaks, your bilateral whispers to Berlin, the European Council fractures. 27 nations, and you're picking favorites. A murmur rippled through the French side as an aide's phone buzzed discreetly, eyes widening at the screen. O'Brien caught it, his scowl deepening, and tapped Trump's arm. The projection shifted to a leaked memo, anonymous, but damning, detailing French lobbying in Washington for a waiver on Iran sanctions, potentially unlocking $5 billion in frozen assets for Paris. Trump seized it, his laugh barking short and sharp. Lobbying? Or betrayal? You've got diplomats in Foggy Bottom, pushing for backdoor deals while we enforce sanctions that bite Tehran by 40%. That's the revelation, Emmanuel. Europe's playing both sides. Drop the tariffs, commit to the carrier group, 2 French frigates in the South China Sea, or we expose this to Congress. Your move turns into checkmate. Macron rose halfway from his seat, the chair scraping like a withheld threat, his voice a whipcrack in the confined space. Expose? You'd burn the house to spite the roof. The EU's cohesion isn't negotiable, it's our shield against the 8% rise in Russian drone sightings over the Black Sea. But if you force our hand? He trailed off as Le Drian placed a restraining hand on his arm, the room's air thickening with unspoken ultimatums. The screens flickered off, plunging the projections into darkness, but the shadows they left clung. Advisors exchanged loaded glances, folders snapping shut like closing doors. Trump stood last, buttoning his jacket with deliberate slowness, the weight of the exposed schemes hanging heavy. The balance had tipped, not decisively, but enough to crack the facade of unity, revealing fissures that could swallow the summit whole. As the group dispersed into the adjoining lounge, its velvet curtains drawn against the gray Paris sky, Macron's phone lit up again, not the whistleblower this time, but a direct line from Berlin. Merkel's voice, clipped and urgent, Emmanuel, they've offered us the moon. But if you go public with those logs, we all fall. Across the room, Trump pocketed his device after a terse call, his expression unreadable. O'Brien whispered close, the French have our Iran play. If they talk, it's war in the headlines by dawn. In the lounge's heavy silence, broken only by the distant toll of a clock, a new figure slipped in from the shadows, Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, her heels clicking softly on the marble. She carried no folder, but her eyes held the weight of impending storm. "Gentlemen," she said, voice steady as steel, "the council's been briefed. It's time we all see the full ledger." The lounge's air hung heavy with the scent of aged cognac and polished brass, the velvet curtains muffling the outside world's drizzle into a distant hush. Low-slung armchairs circled a marble-topped table, where crystal decanters caught the lamplight in fractured glints. Ursula von der Leyen stood at the threshold, her posture unyielding, the faint click of her heels echoing like a summons. Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump turned as one, their advisors clustering like wary satellites, Jean-Yves Le Drian nursing a glass of water, Robert O'Brien scrolling urgently on his tablet. Von der Leyen crossed the room with measured steps, her briefcase snapping open on the table with a decisive thud. She extracted a thick binder, its pages bristling with tabs labeled in crisp German script, NATO fiscal disparities, trade imbalance projections, bilateral undercurrents. The room's temperature seemed to drop as she spread the documents, charts unfurling like battle maps, red lines tracing U.S. tariff impacts, blue spikes marking EU defense contributions. "Presidents," she began, her voice a cool scalpel, "the Commission's audit is complete. What began as whispers in Berlin now demands daylight. France's logs confirm it, American overtures to Germany promise a 15% cut on automotive tariffs, valued at €11 billion annually, if Chancellor Scholz endorses a US-led Indo-Pacific framework, sidelining the EU's common foreign policy." Macron's eyes flicked to the binder, his gold pen resuming its restless twirl, but slower, deliberate. He leaned against the arm of his chair, the leather creaking softly. "Ursula, this revelation fractures more than talks. We've poured $1.2 billion into joint EU cyber initiatives with American tech giants, only to see your bilateral deals erode our leverage. Germany's gain? A projected 4% GDP boost, while France absorbs the hit, 20,000 jobs in aerospace alone at risk if we splinter." Trump's laugh cut through, sharp and unamused, as he gestured to O'Brien. The advisor projected from his tablet, a timeline of EU arms procurement, highlighting France's €12 billion Rafale sales to the Middle East against US losses in the same markets. "Splinter? You're the ones leaking memos to the press, that Iranian waiver push, $5 billion in assets unlocked for Paris while we choke Tehran's oil exports by 38%. Von der Leyen, your audit misses the point. Europe's at $190 billion for defense, but only 42% of that's combat ready. We've got $800 billion in play, covering 72% of the alliance's heavy lift. Those German talks? Pragmatism. You want unity? Match our Pacific commitments, 2 carrier strike groups, or watch funds flow to Tokyo and Canberra instead." Von der Leyen didn't flinch, her finger tracing a graph of subsidy flows. U.S. agricultural supports at $41 billion, distorting EU markets by 12%, French wine exports down 19% year-over-year. She exhaled once, a measured breath that stilled the room. Pragmatism or poaching? The Commission's data shows your LNG deals with Germany, projected to hit €130 billion by 26, lock independency, while France's nuclear exports to Eastern Europe face new American barriers. We've lost $3.7 billion in potential contracts. And the human cost, 1,500 EU personnel redeployed to counter Russian hybrid ops, up 25% since your tariff escalations began. Le Drian interjected, his gravelly tone laced with indignation, sliding a supplemental report across the marble, victim tallies from strained borders, 200 civilian disruptions from increased migrant flows, tied to destabilized trade routes. This isn't numbers on paper. Your isolationist pivot emboldens Moscow. Incursions along the Polish frontier have surged 18%. If the EU splinters, we invite chaos. Russia's budget for disinformation alone tops 2 billion rubles, targeting our unity. The conflict ignited in the lounge's confines, voices overlapping in a staccato rhythm. Trump rose, pacing 2 steps, his shoe soles whispering against the rug. Chaos? You created it with your green deals. Paris Accord pullout cost us credibility, but your carbon tariffs slap American steel with an extra 8%. O'Brien, show them the ledger. The projection bloomed, U.S. losses from EU regulatory hurdles, 16 billion in pharma exports stalled, juxtaposed against France's gains in African mining concessions, valued at €9 billion, often at the expense of American firms. Macron's chair scraped as he stood, matching Trump's height, the space between them charged like a fault line. You tally pharma, we count alliances eroding. That African play? Secured with EU funds, 400 million for stability ops, while your sanctions on Iran ripple back, costing European banks 2.5 billion in compliance fines. Ursula's right, this revelation demands response. The Council convenes tonight. If bilateralism prevails, we invoke Article 50, trade realignment, full stop. Von der Leyen's binder snapped shut, the sound of punctuation in the swelling tension. Advisors shifted, phones buzzing with incoming alerts, leaks already filtering to Brussels correspondents. Trump halted his pace, eyes locking on Macron's. Invoke what you want. But expose those German promises, and we counter with your subsidy black hole, EDF's €9 billion bailout, funneled through opaque channels. The world's watching, your house of cards topples first. The lounge's lamps dimmed fractionally as a timer chimed, signaling the summit's next phase. Glances darted, Le Drian's hand tightening on his glass, O'Brien's tablet screen reflecting a cascade of urgent emails. Von der Leyen gathered her documents, her expression a mask of resolve, but a faint tremor in her voice betrayed the stakes. The elite's reactions cascaded outward, whispers of emergency calls to London and Rome, where secondary players like Boris Johnson and Mario Draghi weighed in, their interests newly entangled in the fray. As the group filed toward the door, the corridor's cooler air carrying echoes of hurried footsteps, Macron pulled von der Leyen aside, his whisper urgent against the stone walls. Ursula, the full audit, does it name names? Scholz's inner circle. She nodded once, eyes scanning the shadows. It does. And Trump's team knows we have it. But there's more, a recording from last night's dinner. American promises to Poland, $8 billion in military aid if they break ranks on tariffs. Across the hall, Trump's phone vibrated insistently, O'Brien at his side. The screen glowed with a secure message, EU presser in 30. Von der Leyen's dropping the German deal bombshell. Counter now, or lose the narrative. In the antechamber's half-light, where portraits of past leaders loomed like silent judges, a new figure emerged from a side door, Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, uninvited and grim-faced. Mr. President, he said, voice low, the White House has eyes on this. If it goes public, the fallout hits us all, starting with a 20% NATO funding revolt in Congress. The antechamber's air was cooler, laced with the musty scent of antique tapestries and the faint ozone hum of hidden surveillance. Dim sconces cast elongated shadows across the vaulted ceiling, where gilded frescoes of Napoleonic triumph seemed to mock the modern fray. Jake Sullivan stood rigid, his suit rumpled from a transatlantic red-eye, eyes darting between Donald Trump and the lingering cluster of advisors. Robert O'Brien hovered close, tablet clutched like a shield, while across the threshold, Emmanuel Macron and Ursula von der Leyen paused, their conversation fracturing at the intruder's arrival. Sullivan's voice sliced the hush, low but insistent, carrying the weight of Washington corridors. Mr. President, this isn't just a spat, it's a fracture line. The recording you mentioned? Our intel confirms it's real, Polish Defense Minister Blazak on a hot mic, promising $8 billion in U.S. arms if Warsaw vetoes EU tariff retaliation. That's a 20% shift in Eastern flank dynamics. Congress is already buzzing. If von der Leyen goes public, funding votes tank by 15% come markup. Trump's jaw set, a muscle twitching as he pocketed his phone, the screen's glow fading like a dying ember. He exhaled sharply, the sound echoing off the stone. Sullivan, you show up now? Biden's ghost breathing down my neck? Tell Langley to plug the leaks, we've got $400 million in cyber tools wasted on this circus. Poland's smart, they're eyeing Russia's 10,000 troop buildup on their border. EU unity? It's a myth when France hoards its nukes and Germany buys cheap gas. From the doorway, Macron's voice cut in, steel-edged, as he stepped forward with von der Leyen at his side. Jean-Yves Le Drian trailed, dossier in hand, his face a map of weathered resolve. Myth? Or manipulation? Your Polish play echoes the German one, $11 billion in tariff relief dangled like bait. We've got the transcripts, Blazak's team projecting a 12% boost in GDP from your deals, while the Baltics lose $2.3 billion in shared defense pacts. Society sees it now, protests in Warsaw, 5,000 strong, chanting against American divide and rule. The elite? Scholz is on the fence, but Draghi in Italy's whispering sanctions reciprocity, costing you $25 billion in Mediterranean trade. Von der Leyen nodded, her binder reopening with a soft snap, pages rustling like dry leaves. She spread fresh addendums, victim ledgers from economic fallout, 18,000 EU jobs evaporated in the auto sector since the tariff hikes, contrasted against U.S. gains of $14 billion in reshored manufacturing. The Commission's full report hits the wires in hours. Russia's exploiting this, disinformation campaigns up 32%, framing the transatlantic rift as Western weakness. We've documented 900 cyber intrusions on EU grids since the summit started, half traced to Moscow proxies. New interests emerge, London's Johnson floating a bilateral US-UK pact, bypassing Brussels entirely. That's not revelation, it's rupture. The conflict erupted in the antechamber's confines, voices clashing like crossed swords. Sullivan interjected, his tone urgent, pulling an encrypted drive from his pocket and slotting it into O'Brien's tablet. Projections bloomed on the wall, maps of Indo-Pacific assets, U.S. carrier groups versus Europe's scant 2 frigates committed. Rupture hits everyone. Iran's proxies in Yemen have sunk 3 tankers this month, valued at $1.7 billion, emboldened by our divided front. If Poland flips, NATO's eastern deterrence crumbles, Russia's budget for Kaliningrad fortifications jumps to 3 billion rubles. Mr. President, counter with the full ledger, France's African ops? 400 million EU funds, but Paris schemes 20% for domestic kickbacks. Macron's pen clicked shut, his exhale loud in the swelling tension. He advanced a step, eyes locking on Trump's. Kickbacks? Your arms lobby funnels $42 billion to contractors, propping up F-35 overruns by 18%. Le Drian, the figures. The foreign minister thrust forward a chart, French troop deployments, 25,000 in the Sahel, costing €2 billion, offset by zero U.S. air support since the pivot. Victims mount, 1,200 displaced in Mali from unchecked insurgencies, tied to your sanctions-starving aid flows. If the EU invokes trade barriers, mirroring your 25% steel wall, we shutter ports from Rotterdam to Trieste, hitting your exports by 30 billion annually. Trump's fist balled at his side, not striking but hovering, the air crackling. Invoke away. But expose Poland, and we release the subsidy audit, EDF's €9 billion black hole, funneled through Luxembourg shells. The world's elites react, Beijing's already courting von der Leyen with Belt and Road extensions, promising 15 billion in infrastructure to fill your gaps. O'Brien's tablet chimed, an alert flashing, Brussels press corps mobilizing, leaks confirming the Polish recording. Von der Leyen gathered her papers, her voice steady amid the storm. The councils live now, 27 heads, weighing expulsion clauses for bilateral betrayers. New players, Spain's Sanchez demanding transparency on LNG deals, which lock Europe into 140 billion in dependency by 27. Glances sharpened, Sullivan's hand twitching toward his phone, Le Drian's jaw clenching as a distant murmur of gathering media seeped through the walls. The balance shifted palpably, alliances not just strained, but splintering, with secondary figures like Scholz and Johnson now vectors for chaos. As the group pressed toward the summit's plenary hall, its doors looming like judgment, Macron's aide slipped him a note, the paper crisp and urgent. Berlin's wavering, Scholz wants a side deal. But the recording's viral, protests swell to 10,000 in Paris. Trump, striding ahead, caught Sullivan's murmur. If Congress pulls 20% of NATO funds, that's $152 billion redirected, the alliance dies here. In the hall's anteroom, thick with the scent of fresh newsprint from briefing packets, a late arrival pushed through the crowd, Antony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, briefcase in hand, face ashen. Everyone, hold. The State Department's got intercepts, Macron's team shopping the leaks to Reuters. But there's a wild card, Chinese envoys in the lobby, offering von der Leyen a counter-summit in Beijing. The plenary hall thrummed with restrained chaos, its vaulted ceilings echoing the shuffle of feet and the snap of briefcases amid rows of leather-bound chairs. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows on the polished parquet floor, where the scent of hurried coffee mingled with the metallic tang of overworked printers. Antony Blinken stood at the cluster's edge, his briefcase dangling from one hand, face drawn tight as he scanned the room, delegates from 27 EU states murmuring into phones, screens glowing with breaking feeds. Emmanuel Macron and Ursula von der Leyen hovered nearby, Jean-Yves Le Drian at their flank, while Donald Trump loomed with Jake Sullivan and Robert O'Brien, the air between the groups crackling like static before a storm. Blinken's voice dropped low, urgent, as he thrust a tablet toward Trump, its screen alive with intercepted chatter. Mr. President, Reuters has the Polish recording, Blaszak's voice, clear as day, promising $8 billion in arms for a tariff veto. It's viral, 2 million views in 20 minutes, protests swelling to 15,000 outside the Quai d'Orsay. The State Department's counter, we've drafted a legal brief to the WTO, alleging EU distortion via subsidy cascades, your EDF €9 billion funnel, plus Germany's $120 billion LNG lock-in. File it, and we freeze their assets by 20% pending review. Trump's eyes narrowed, a vein pulsing at his temple as he snatched the tablet, scrolling with a thick thumb. He exhaled a sharp huff, the sound cutting through the din. File it? Do it now. But add the intel angle, Macron's shopping those leaks to Langley critics, risking a 20% cut in shared SIGINT. We've got $200 million in cyber defenses exposed if this blows. Blinken, rally Congress, if they pull NATO strings, it's $150 billion redirected to Pacific bases, Guam gets the boost, Europe gets the bill. Across the divide, Macron's phone buzzed insistently, von der Leyen's aide whispering the update, Chinese envoys in the lobby, their offer formalized, a Beijing summit with $15 billion in Belt and Road infrastructure, targeted at fracturing EU cohesion. Macron's gold pen tapped once against his palm, his voice a controlled whip as he turned to von der Leyen. Ursula, ignore Beijing's bait. We counter with institutional pressure, invoke the Commission's antitrust probe on U.S. tech giants, Google and Amazon's €48 billion fine pending, tied to your tariff games. Leak the full subsidy ledger to the European Parliament, let MEPs demand reciprocity, mirror your 25% steel wall on American autos, shuttering Detroit plants by 12% output. Von der Leyen nodded, her fingers tightening on the binder as she signaled her team. A junior attaché darted off, phone to ear, coordinating with Brussels lawyers. It's escalation, Emmanuel. The Parliament's emergency session starts in hours. We'll push for a unified trade blockade, projected to cost the US $35 billion in exports, from wine to widgets. But the human toll, 23,000 more jobs at risk in the EU, factories idling from Bilbao to Bucharest. And the Chinese play? It's a trap, strings attached to 20% of our rare earth supplies, now dominated by Beijing. The local clash ignited over control of the summit's media narrative, the hall's podium looming like a contested throne. Le Drian stepped forward, dossier raised like a gauntlet, his gravelly tone slicing the tension. Media? We've got the upper hand, our presser in 10 minutes, unveiling the bilateral poach, Poland's $8 billion, Germany's $11. Victims first. 500,000 Eastern Europeans displaced by the instability your pivots breed, Russian incursions up 22% along the Suwalki Gap. He paused, eyes locking on Blinken. Your WTO brief? It's a bluff, our lawyers counter with evidence of U.S. institutional overreach, sanctions on Iran costing EU banks $2.8 billion in fines, now weaponized against allies. Sullivan interjected, his voice taut, pulling O'Brien aside to murmur coordinates for a rapid response team. Not a bluff. We've looped in the Justice Department, subpoenas incoming for French lobbying firms in D.C., tied to that $5 billion Iranian asset thaw. If they drop the ledger, we expose the kickbacks, 20% skim on Sahel ops, 400 million EU funds vanishing into Parisian pockets. Trump nodded curtly, his shoe tapping a restless rhythm on the floor, the sound amplifying in the charged space. Macron advanced, chair legs scraping as he claimed a spot near the podium, von der Leyen at his elbow. Subpoenas? You'll need them for your own house, farm bill distortions funneling $43 billion to Midwest corn, undercutting our markets by 18%. We threaten institutional lockdown, EU foreign ministers vote on freezing US base access, Ramstein's 700 personnel out, a 15% drop in transatlantic logistics. Advisors buzzed, phones chiming with confirmations, Brussels affirming the probe, Washington prepping the filing. The balance tipped, no longer whispers, but open warfare, with higher authorities, the WTO, Parliament, Justice, now weapons in the fray. Blinken exhaled loudly, dropping his briefcase with a thud that turned heads. This hits the system, NATO's cohesion fractures, Russia's 3 billion ruble disinformation budget floods the gap. Backroom talks? Forget it, we've got calls to Capitol Hill, funding revolt imminent if you push the blockade. Glances darted, the hall's murmur swelling to a roar as media crews filtered in, cameras whirring to life. Von der Leyen's hand steadied on the podium, but a flicker of doubt crossed her face. The Chinese offers shadow lengthening, promising escape but at the cost of sovereignty. As the presser loomed, its lights glaring like interrogators, Trump's team huddled, O'Brien's tablet flashing an urgent intercept, EU ministers greenlight probe. US assets frozen in 48 hours, 30 billion at stake. Macron, mounting the steps, caught a whisper from Le Drian, the justice subpoena's real, hits our envoys tomorrow. But we've got a defector, a Polish aide, ready to testify on the arms deal. In the hall's wings, thick with the sweat of exertion and the ink of fresh printouts, a new silhouette emerged from the shadows, Olaf Scholz, Germany's chancellor, face ashen, flanked by silent guards. He approached the podium unannounced, voice booming over the din. Enough. Berlin breaks silence, the American promises were lies, but the damage is done. If we don't mediate now, the alliance loses 20% of its eastern shield, and a ghost from the past rises to claim it. The plenary hall's clamor fractured at Olaf Scholz's words, the air thickening with the sharp scent of flashbulbs and the undercurrent of spilled coffee from jostled trays. Spotlights pierced the haze, pinning the German chancellor in a halo as he gripped the podium, his tie askew, eyes scanning the sea of faces, Emmanuel Macron rigid beside Ursula von der Leyen, Donald Trump leaning forward with arms crossed, Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan murmuring urgently in the wings. Rows of delegates shifted, whispers cascading like dry ice, while screens overhead looped muted feeds of swelling protests, 20,000 in Brussels now, banners decrying transatlantic treachery. Scholz's voice boomed, steady but laced with gravel from a sleepless night. Berlin's archives confirm it, American envoys promised 11 billion euros in tariff relief, targeted at Volkswagen's electric push, projecting a 13% market share gain in the US, in exchange for our abstention on the EU blockade vote. Lies, all of it. We've lost 2.4 billion in LNG overpayments already, locked into your contracts while French nuclear exports to us face new barriers. The Eastern Shield? 20% eroded if Poland flips, 8,000 troops exposed, Russian drones up 35% along the Oder. Macron's pen halted mid-twirl, his exhale sharp as he stepped to the podium side, von der Leyen nodding in grim accord. Olaf, your revelation arms us. The Parliament's probe accelerates, antitrust on US tech now includes data flows, 49 billion euros in fines if Amazon's cloud dominance is deemed predatory, mirroring your steel tariffs that idled. 17,000 German workers last quarter. Le Drian thrust a fresh dossier forward, pages splaying across the lectern, charts of victim cascades, 900 civilians impacted by border strains, economic fallout from the rift costing the EU 4 billion in lost cohesion funds. Trump's chair scraped back, the sound a thunderclap in the hall's vault, as he rose, Sullivan at his elbow with a tablet blazing alerts. Revelation? Try desperation. Scholz, you sat on this while your firms pocketed 130 billion in our LNG, up 28% year over year. We counter with institutional fire, Justice Department subpoenas served, French envoys in D.C. grilled on the $5 billion Iranian thaw, potential indictments for sanctions evasion. That's 20% of your diplomatic corps tangled, Emmanuel, while our Pacific pivot secures Guam with an extra $50 billion redirected from NATO scraps. The local conflict erupted over control of the NATO Funding Committee, a side chamber's door swinging open as committee chair Jens Stoltenberg, the alliance's Secretary-General, entered unbidden, briefcase in hand. His face was etched with Nordic pallor, eyes darting between the leaders. Presidents, chancellors, this hits the core. Emergency audit shows U.S. commitments at 73% of the budget, $580 billion, but EU shortfalls in rapid response forces, only 40% readiness, leaving 12,000 troops vulnerable in the Baltics. If the blockade passes, we lose $25 billion in joint procurement. Russia's Kaliningrad buildup accelerates to 4 billion rubles, probing with 15% more incursions. Von der Leyen seized the moment, her voice cutting through the swell. Vulnerable? Your audit ignores the pressure. American threats to withhold F-35 tech transfers, valued at €6 billion, unless we drop the probe. We threaten back. European Council vote on base closures, Incirlic's U.S. contingent out, a 19% logistics hit. New risks emerge. Beijing's counteroffer swells to $18 billion in rail links, but at the cost of 22% dependency on their rare earths for our defense tech. Advisors buzzed, phones vibrating with Capitol Hill readouts, funding revolt gaining traction, a 15% cut looming if the leaks persist. Blinken interjected, his tone a honed blade, signaling O'Brien to project from the hall's rear screen, timelines of backroom negotiations, U.S. offers to the U.K., Boris Johnson on the line, promising $10 billion in post-Brexit trade if London mediates. Negotiations? This is survival. Iran's proxies ramp up, 4 tanker attacks this week, $3.2 billion in damages, exploiting our divide. We pressure with leaks of our own, EDF's subsidy fraud, €9 billion laundered through offshore shells, exposed to Interpol. Stakes rise, no longer tariffs, but the system's arteries, NATO fractures, and the Indo-Pacific falls to China's $300 billion Navy buildup. Scholz leaned into the podium, sweat beading at his brow, the hall's air growing stifling under the lights. Pressure mounts from all sides. My cabinet splits. Greens demand full disclosure, projecting a 12% drop in coalition stability if we side with either. Threats pour in, anonymous calls to my office, hinting at compromat from Moscow's 2 billion ruble hack farm. Macron placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture, but his eyes flicked to Trump, unyielding, the balance shifting as institutional hammers fell, WTO briefs filed, subpoenas en route, votes teetering. Trump paced the stage's edge, shoe heels clicking like metronomes of impatience. Splits? Welcome to the game. Higher authorities step in. I've got the Pentagon on speed dial, redirect $40 billion from European ops to Taiwan Straits if you invoke closures. The alliance? It's us carrying the load, 80% of airlift capacity, while you bicker over subsidies that shame the ledger. The screen flickered with incoming data, Congress memos circulating, a 20% funding slash now at 60 votes. Murmurs swelled, delegates rising, the hall's energy coiling toward rupture. Stoltenberg's briefcase snapped open, spilling audit binders that skidded across the floor, pages fluttering like startled birds. Enough. The committee convenes now. If no truce, we invoke Article 4, consultations on threats, but with a 23% budget hole. The world's watching, UN envoys in the gallery, Iran's oil proxies surging 8% in output amid our chaos. As the leaders clustered around the scattered documents, the hall's doors burst open to urgent aides, faces pale. Von der Leyen's phone lit with a Brussels alert, Parliament vote, blockade passes 55%. U.S. assets frozen, $32 billion locked. Trump's device buzzed in tandem, Sullivan whispering close, Capitol revolt, NATO bill gutted. But Intel drops a bomb, Macron's inner circle has a defector, ready to flip on the Iranian play. In the chamber's alcove, dim and thick with the residue of cigar stubs from prior sessions, a lone figure waited, Vladimir Putin, uninvited via video link on a secure feed, his image materializing on the screen like a specter. Gentlemen, his voice rumbled through the speakers, cold as Siberian wind, your fractures are our gain. Watch as we mobilize 25,000 along the border, unless you beg for mediation. The alcove's shadows deepened as Vladimir Putin's image filled the secure screen, his face a mask of calculated calm against the Kremlin backdrop, polished wood panels and the faint gleam of a samovar in the corner. The air in the plenary hall grew stagnant, laced with the acrid bite of overheated electronics and the sweat of frayed nerves, as delegates froze mid-motion, eyes locked on the intrusion. Emmanuel Macron's hand dropped from Olaf Scholz's shoulder, his gold pen clattering to the floor, while Donald Trump halted his pace, fists clenching at his sides. Ursula von der Leyen and Antony Blinken exchanged a glance, the weight of the moment pressing like an uninvited guest at a funeral. Putin's voice rolled out, measured and metallic through the speakers, carrying the chill of Moscow winters. Fractures like yours invite opportunity. We've mobilized 25,000 troops along the Ukrainian frontier, up 15% from last month, exercises that could stretch to Kaliningrad in hours. Your NATO ledger? 190 billion euros total, but only 28% allocated to deterrence. We offer mediation, drop the tariffs, share the Iranian assets, 5 billion euros unfrozen for joint energy deals, and we pull back. Refuse? Our gas flows to Europe dip another 12%, costing you 60 billion in winter shortages. Macron recovered first, striding to the screen, his voice a lash in the stunned hush. Mediation? From the architect of Donbass incursions, 18% rise in artillery strikes this quarter alone? Your offer is extortion. We've documented 2 billion rubles in your disinformation farms, flooding our feeds with rift narratives. Ursula, cut the feed, now. Von der Leyen signaled an aide, but the image lingered a beat too long, Putin's eyes narrowing before the screen went black, leaving an echo of static. Trump's laugh barked out, short and devoid of humor, as he turned on the group, Sullivan and O'Brien at his flanks with tablets humming. Extortion? He's playing you like fiddles. We've got satellites tracking those 25,000, tanks rolling, not exercising. Counter it, Pentagon's on line 1, authorizing a 10 billion surge to Poland's eastern flank, F-35s en route, boosting deterrence by 22%. But you, Emmanuel? Your Iranian thaw risks it all, just as subpoenas hit your embassy in hours, freezing 2.5 billion in diplomatic funds. Stakes aren't positions anymore, they're the whole damn firewall against Moscow. The local conflict detonated over a leaked audio intercept, Stoltenberg's briefcase still splayed open on the floor like a gutted fish, pages of audit figures scattering underfoot. Jens Stoltenberg snatched up a tablet, his face paling as he activated a secure channel, voice urgent. The committee's hacked, Russian proxies, but the file's gold, a recording from last night's Berlin dinner. Scholz's deputy, on speaker with your envoys, Mr. President, promising 11 billion in tariff cuts for a quiet veto on the EU blockade. It's not betrayal, it's balance, he says. 20 million listens already on dark web mirrors, protests exploding to 30,000 in Berlin, workers chanting for coalition collapse. Scholz staggered back, hand to his forehead, the hall's murmur swelling to a roar. Fabricated, must be. My cabinet split, Greens at 40% support, demanding resignation if true. We've lost 3.1 billion in market cap since dawn, Volkswagen shares down 11%. Olaf, hold, von der Leyen interjected, pulling him aside, her binder slamming shut. It's real, our cyber team confirms timestamps. We pressure back, invoke the Council's Article 7, suspension of Germany's voting rights until cleared, risking a 15% fracture in EU funds. New threats, Beijing ups their offer to 20 billion in ports, but whispers of embedded tech, 25% backdoors in the hardware. Le Drian lunged for the podium, dossier raised, his gravelly roar cutting through. Pressure? This leaks you're doing, Donald, retaliation for our parliament vote. Victims pile up, 1,200 migrants turned back at Polish borders, chaos from the economic squeeze costing 4 billion in humanitarian aid. We threaten institutional lockdown, foreign ministers demand NATO Article 5 drills, full mobilization, 100,000 troops, but excluding U.S. access unless subpoenas drop. Advisors scrambled, phones erupting, Capitol Hill feeds showing a 23% funding revolt now at 70 votes, Brussels confirming the Article 7 motion. Blinken exhaled sharply, dropping to one knee to gather Stoltenberg's papers, his voice taut as he rose. Lockdown? You're inviting the bear in. The leak exposes more, French Sahel kickbacks, 400 million skimmed, now Interpol's radar. We've got backroom lines open to London, Johnson mediating a truce, 10 billion trade sweetener if he sways the UK to abstain on sanctions. Higher authorities converge, UN Security Council emergency session in 2 hours, Iran's proxies surging 8% in Red Sea attacks, 3.8 billion in shipping halted. Trump nodded, his shoe resuming its tap, the rhythm accelerating like a countdown. The hall's energy coiled, delegates rising in waves, cameras whirring from the galleries as media breached the cordon. Scholz collapsed into a chair, face ashen, whispering to an aide, "If the coalition breaks, 42% polling drop, we're done." Macron circled the screen's dark void, eyes on Trump. "Your surge to Poland? It buys time, but at what cost? 18 billion redirected from Indo-Pacific, leaving Taiwan exposed to China's 350 billion naval edge? The system's cracking, no more games, or Putin's 25,000 become an invasion force." Stoltenberg stood tall amid the chaos, briefcase refastened with trembling hands. "The committee votes now, 25 billion procurement hole if no unity." Threats from all quarters, anonymous dossiers circulating, hinting at compromat on every leader here. Glances locked in the frenzy, Sullivan's tablet chiming with Pentagon confirmations, Le Drian's jaw set as a fresh alert buzzed, Interpol warrants issued, hits French and German envoys by midnight. As the leaders converged in a tense huddle, the hall's doors shuddered under pounding fists from outside, protesters or security, impossible to tell, the air electric with impending storm. Von der Leyen's phone vibrated, a Brussels directive flashing, Article 7 passes. Germany isolated, but a bigger leak incoming, Trump's private call to Putin, brokering a side deal on gas. Trump's device lit in response, O'Brien murmuring close, White House override, Biden's team intervening, but too late. The recording's authentic, it names you in the Iranian thaw. In the alcove's deepening gloom, where the summit's overflow maps lay forgotten on a side table, a side door creaked open, Lloyd Austin, U.S. Secretary of Defense, striding in with a sealed envelope, face carved from granite. "Everyone, stand down. The Pentagon's audit reveals a ghost in the machine, Chinese moles in the NATO servers, feeding the leaks. But the real bomb, Russia's not mobilizing troops, they're prepping a cyber strike on the grid, blacking out Europe for 72 hours unless we capitulate." The alcove's gloom thickened like congealing ink, the side table's maps curling at the edges under the faint draft from Austin's entrance. The sealed envelope in his hand crinkled as he tore it open, his broad frame blocking the light from the hall's frenzy, where shouts now mingled with the wail of security sirens outside. Emmanuel Macron pivoted sharply, Ursula von der Leyen at his side, her binder clutched like a talisman, while Donald Trump loomed forward, Jake Sullivan and Robert O'Brien framing him like sentinels. Olaf Scholz slumped against the wall, his face drained, as Jens Stoltenberg gathered the last of his scattered audits, the papers whispering accusations. Austin's voice rumbled low, gravel from years of command posts, as he spread satellite prints across the table, grayscale images of server farms in Shenzhen, time-stamped with Chinese PLA stamps. Pentagon's deep dive, moles embedded since 23, siphoning NATO logistics, 47 terabytes stolen, including our F-35 schematics worth €6 billion. The leaks? Their handiwork, time to your rift. But the cyber strike's no bluff. Russia's prepped a wiper attack on the EU grid, projected blackout from Helsinki to Lisbon. 72 hours, costing $120 billion in frozen commerce. We've traced the kill switch to GRU servers in Kaliningrad, pull it without concessions, and Europe's dark. Macron's exhale cut the air, sharp as shattered glass, his gold pen forgotten on the floor. Concessions to phantoms? Your moles explain the recordings, but not the tariffs, 25% walls that bled us $4 billion last quarter. We counter, activate the EU's rapid cyber response, 300 specialists deploying now, firewalls up 20% against the wiper. Von der Leyen, loop in the commission, freeze Chinese assets here, 18 billion in Belt and Road loans clawed back, hitting Beijing's rare earth leverage by 15%. Le Drian nodded, phone already to ear, coordinating with Paris's DGSE, the room's shadows dancing as Austin's prints rustled under probing fingers. Trump's fist grazed the table, not slamming but thudding enough to jolt the maps. Freeze what you want, we've got the kill switch codes, shared SIGINT, 100 million in tools to neutralize it. But this turning point demands alliance, drop the WDO brief, pardon the subpoenas on your Iranian thaw, 5 billion assets, and we surge 20 billion to joint cyber shields. Refuse? Pentagon redirects to Pacific, Taiwan gets the grid armor, Europe gets the blackout. Sullivan interjected, tablet glowing with intercepts. Grids down means chaos, 2 million households offline, hospitals on generators, a 12% spike in regional unrest. Higher stakes, UNSC's voting now. If we expose the moles, China vetoes sanctions, but Iran's proxies ramp to 10% oil disruptions. The local conflict blazed over a failed defection operation, the alcove's door creaking as a disheveled aide burst in, Scholz's deputy, face slick with sweat, clutching a USB drive like a grenade. Chancellor, it was me, the dinner recording. I flipped for the tariff promise, $11 billion for our auto sector, projecting 13% job saves. But the moles caught me, GRU's got compromat, videos, demands for more leaks. Scholz surged forward, gripping the man's collar, the air electric with betrayal. You? For 13%? We've lost $4.2 billion in market trust since dawn, coalition at 38%, Greens walking out. The deputy thrust the drive forward, it's the full log, American backchannels to Poland, $8 billion arms dangling, but laced with Chinese payoffs, $2 million in hush funds. Von der Leyen snatched the drive, slotting it into her tablet, screens blooming with emails, U.S. envoys wiring funds through Hong Kong shells, tying the Polish deal to Beijing's grid sabotage. Betrayal cascades. The Commission's auditors confirm, 20% of NATO's cyber budget, €40 billion, siphoned via these moles. We arrest now, Europol teams mobilizing for the deputy, potential indictments for treason, fracturing Berlin's cabinet further. Macron's eyes hardened, signaling security, 2 guards materialized, cuffing the deputy mid-protest, his pleas echoing, it was balance, not betrayal. As they dragged him into the hall's glare, Austin exhaled loudly, envelope crumpling in his fist. Arrests change nothing, the wipers live, countdown from Moscow, tied to your fractures. We've got a demonstrative op, drone strikes on GRU outposts, but it risks escalation, 25,000 Russian troops still mobilized, artillery up 18%. Trump paced the narrow space, shoe heels grinding against the stone. Op? Launch it. But this point of no return hits home. The moles expose our house too, F-35 leaks cost us $9 billion in retrofits. No way back, alliance or ashes. O'Brien's tablet chimed, Interpol warrants expanding, now netting French and German envoys, a 15% diplomatic freeze. Stoltenberg rose, audits tucked under arm, his voice steady amid the storm. The committees dissolved, $25 billion procurement voided. New alliances form in the rubble, UK's Johnson on the line, offering bilateral cyber pacts, $10 billion shared, but excluding the EU core. Glances clashed, Scholz releasing his grip, face crumbling as coalition texts flooded his phone, 40% defection risk. Macron turned to von der Leyen, whisper taut, the arrest stick, no mercy. But the wiper. The alcove shuddered as alarms blared from the hall, lights flickering in prelude. Austin's radio crackled, grid probe detected, Chinese servers lighting up. The strikes forward, Europe's first blackout in Paris, 10 minutes out. As guards hauled the deputy away, his USB data still parsing on von der Leyen's screen, a shadow detached from the wall, Angela Merkel, retired but summoned, her presence a ghost of stability, eyes fierce. Stop. I've seen the full compromat archive, Russian and Chinese hands intertwined. But the real turning point, a secret merger proposed in the shadows, binding Trump and Putin against the EU, $20 billion in gas for silence on the moles. Trump's phone buzzed violently, Sullivan murmuring, it's real, your advisor's signature on the draft. If it leaks, impeachment calls surge to 60% in Congress. In the alcove's stifling hush, broken only by the distant wail of failing generators, Austin sealed the envelope anew, his verdict dropping like lead. The op fails without unity. Launch the drones, or watch the alliance burn, from within. The alcove's tension eased fractionally as the live stream of the draft flickered to a close on von der Leyen's laptop, the global wires buzzing with analysis rather than alarm. Angela Merkel's revelation had landed like a precisely aimed volley, exposing the merger without shattering the room's fragile equilibrium. Emmanuel Macron straightened, his gold pen retrieved from the floor, while Donald Trump pocketed his phone, the impeachment chatter from Sullivan reduced to a murmur. Ursula von der Leyen closed the device with a soft click, Olaf Scholz leaning against the wall, his coalition's wobbles contained for now. Lloyd Austin folded the satellite prints, the drone op held in abeyance, no launches, no retaliations, just the steady hum of Pentagon lines waiting for the word. Merkel's eyes swept the group, her voice even, carrying the weight of boardroom negotiations rather than battlefield decrees. The draft's out, $20 billion in gas reroutes, tied to silence on the moles and tariff vetoes. But it's paper now, not policy. Beijing's cut was $12 billion in rare earths, but we trace it to a single shell company, no deeper web. The turning point isn't rupture, it's reckoning. Drop the bilaterals, Poland's $8 billion arms offer, Germany's $11 billion tariff relief, and we reform the ledger together. NATO audits quarterly, subsidies capped at 10% of GDP, no more shadows. Macron nodded slowly, exhaling through his nose, the gold pen tapping once against his thigh. Reckoning suits. The EU's probe pauses, no fines on your tech giants, €49 billion held in reserve, but in exchange, you withdraw the WTO brief on our EDF. Subsidies, €9 billion secured without freezes. We've lost $4 billion to your tariffs, match it with concessions on autos, drop to 15%, saving 17,000 jobs across Lyon and Detroit. Le Drian slid a revised dossier forward, charts adjusted, victim tallies from economic strains now framed as shared burdens, 1,200 border disruptions mitigated by joint patrols, cost split 50-50. Trump leaned on the table, his broad hand splaying the maps flat, voice gruff but measured. Concessions? Fine, but numbers first. US covers 70% of NATO, $580 billion, but you commit 2 carrier groups to the Indo-Pacific, France and Germany leading, valued at $23 billion in assets. No more freeloading, the moles? We purged them jointly, 47 terabytes recovered, F-35 schematics relocked. The merger draft? Shredded, my advisor faces internal review, no public spectacle. Sullivan interjected quietly, tablet updating, Congress cools, funding holds at full, no revolts, but oversight committees demand transparency, a 12% audit increase on all sides. The local conflict resolved over the subsidy clause, a legislative trap sprung and disarmed in the alcove's hush. Von der Leyen traced a graph on her screen, U.S. Farm Bill distortions at $43 billion, undercutting EU markets by 18%. The trap's here, your clause in the Pacific Pact, exempting American AG from EU carbon tariffs, projecting a 9% hit to our exports. We counter with parity, mirror it in NATO funding, no exemptions for French nuclear subsidies. Agree, and the Council's vote shifts, blockade averted, assets unfrozen at $32 billion, stability restored by quarter's end. Scholz stirred, his whisper gaining strength. Parity works for Berlin, our LNG lock-in at $130 billion eases if tariffs drop 11%. Coalition holds at 52%, no walks, just reforms. Austin set the radio down, the channel silent. No ops needed, the wiper threat? Traced and contained, GRU servers isolated, no blackouts, just a 15% dip in Russian cyber probes after our joint warning. Stakes recalibrate, not the system crumbling, but evolving, new rules for the game, bilaterals banned, audits binding. Trump met Macron's gaze across the table, a nod exchanged, the air lightening as aides noted the terms. Merkel gathered the prints, her exhale collective. No way back to the old fractures, but forward to balance. The characters adapt, positions held, but the ledger's clean, EU GDP projections up 4% with fair trade, US exports steady at $700 billion. The alcove door opened to the hall's subdued murmurs, delegates reconvening under the chandelier's steady glow, no alarms, just the rustle of revised agreements. Macron paused at the threshold, turning to Trump. The summit salvaged, Indo-Pacific Pact signed by dawn, 2 frigates each, $23 billion committed. Trump buttoned his jacket, Sullivan at his side. Signed. But watch the moles, next leak costs real. In the hall's renewed calm, where screens now displayed joint communiques instead of scandals, a final figure approached, Jens Stoltenberg, audits refiled, his voice bridging the divide. Committee reconvenes tomorrow, procurement at $25 billion, fully funded, no holes. The alliance endures, stronger, if we keep the shadows at bay. As the leaders dispersed into side chambers for the ink to dry, von der Leyen's phone lit with Brussels confirmation, pact ratified. No fractures, just the new normal.